All right, let's get started. Good morning and welcome. My name is Karanbir Singh. I'm a program manager on the Windows security team. When we look at apps today, there's a very large majority of apps that are connected to the internet. They do so either to provide services, or provide personalization, or provide both. As a matter of fact, just having an app that connects to the internet that provides a generic set of services to our users is no longer good enough. Our customers demand an experience that's tailored to them, that's tailored to their preferences. Now here's the catch. While they love a personalized experience, our users hate taking extra steps in order to get there. It's great when I launch an app that's a reader app, for example, and it shows me all the articles that I like reading, or if it's a shopping app that I go to and serves me all the products that I might be interested in buying. Now, that's great. But what isn't as great is the fact that I have to log in, authenticate, sign up for accounts, and take these extra steps, right? These extra steps lead to a high drop-off rate, and not to mention the user frustration and the poor user experience. On the other hand, personalization is great. It results in satisfaction. Satisfaction in terms, in general, results in higher engagement rates and, of course, higher loyalty. At the end of the day, your users like using your app, which means more money. As developers, it is one of our goals to make sure that we bridge this gap. We bridge this gap providing experiences that absolutely delight our customers, and we do so in a way that's so seamless. Users love just going to your app, start using it without having to jump through a lot of hoops, right? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. I've broadly broken down the talk in 3 sections. So we're going to talk about the various tools that are available in Windows that we can leverage in order to provide this great experience that we talk about. And in order to do so, let's talk about 3 buckets. The first one being authentication. And under authentication, I want to touch upon topics like, how does one authenticate to various services? So how does one authenticate to Microsoft services using Microsoft accounts? How should one authenticate to services that you own? How should one authenticate to services provided by the likes of Facebook and Twitter? In order to authenticate to your services, a lot of time we end up collecting users' credentials. What are the best practices when it comes to storing those credentials such that first they're stored securely? Additionally, how do we do so in a way that the users don't have to re-authenticate, not just on that device, but also on all of their devices? And finally, how do we abstract away all of these details from the end user? Like, how do we expose all of these complex plumbing in a very simple, intuitive, consistent, easy-to-use way to the end user, such that they know what to do when they start using your apps? They can get to what they want to do, which is just using your apps. All right, so let's get started with number 1. So with Windows, it is now possible for your users to log on to the box using their Microsoft account. Now, that's great. What that really does and what it means in our context right now is that a user, just because they logged on to the box using their Microsoft account, can go straight to using your application and they're seamlessly logged in. A lot of times we expect users to sign up for accounts just because we want to basically know who they are, right? We want to know who they are so that we get them to sign in and then provide the personalized experience. We don't have to absolutely do that. Using the fact that Microsoft account exists and users log on to Windows using their Microsoft account, you can just leverage that in your apps. You can bootstrap the user sign-up process with Microsoft accounts, right? Takes care of one step, which is the sign-up stage. And then, obviously, you can provide a very seamless experience. In addition to that, you could also, given the power of Microsoft accounts, you could provide really great continuous experiences across devices using Windows roaming settings, right? You could An example would be your, let's say, a movies app, right? And you could start from where you left off on, let's say, device A. If you're on device B, you could just go exactly where you were. So there are a bunch of benefits. So let's talk about how one should do this. We provide the Live SDK in Windows, which is a great sort of set of APIs that you can use in order to connect to a Microsoft account and Microsoft services. These APIs are kind of broken down into two pieces. There's a server-side set and then the client-side. Server-side lets you use protocols like OAuth and REST APIs to provide the services. And of course, there's the client-side, which are optional, but do make it super, super simple for your applications to connect to these back-end services, right? I'm not going to go into too many details today because this was something that was covered really extensively last year at Build. So I do recommend, if this is something that you're interested in checking out my colleague Shelly Goo's talk, which is called Powering Your App with Microsoft Account. I am, however, going to go into just a little bit of detail. So this is the sample code that you would use if you want to integrate your, your app using Microsoft Account. So we have a class, LiveAuth Client. Now, this is the class that abstracts away all of the authentication flow from your app, right? Then there's a method, initialize async. This method takes in a parameter, which is the scope. Now, scope is basically a list of all the things that you want to ask your user to provide or give you access, give your app access to. Once this method finishes, the LiveConnect client class takes in a session object. Now, the session object contains all the information that you need in order to access these services. The LiveConnect client provides that abstraction that talks to our REST APIs. The REST API services now return users' information that's stored on Microsoft services like profiles, SkyDrive, contacts, etc. The protocol, as you see, is pretty simple to use. You give it a path, it does its magic, it returns data in JSON format. Then the client library interprets this and converts it into a dictionary object, which is returned back to you. And then you can access this dictionary object, the basic key-value pair. The point I'm trying to make here is that with Microsoft accounts, you can provide a great continuous experience. You don't absolutely have to have users sign up for your services. You can just bootstrap that whole process and just leverage Microsoft accounts. That's great, leads to a much seamless experience, will lead to people getting to your app and using them in a much more faster way. Of course, all of this is super simple. Check out the Live SDK, and you're good to go. Also, I have a little bit of color coding going on, so if you miss stuff, that's fine, but the blue slides are kind of key takeaways. All right, now we know how to connect to Microsoft services using Microsoft accounts. Also, I want to highlight the fact that you don't just need, you can even use Microsoft accounts to authenticate to your websites. So on Windows 8.1 right now, when you log on to your machine using your Microsoft account and you go to Outlook.com and you're just seamlessly signed in, that's the kind of experience you can provide in your apps and on your websites too. So check it out. All right, we've talked about Microsoft accounts. Now, oftentimes, we really need users to authenticate to our services to provide functionality. In order to do so, we require users to sign up, of course, and then enter their credentials to connect to that service, right? So let's take an example and kind of go through that use case. All right. So what I have here is a very simple app. All it does is, prompts the user for their credentials, authenticates them. Once successfully authenticated, pulls pictures from the backend, and, populates the app. I did not get the memo of the supernova, so my pictures are different. So I'm going to go ahead and authenticate. And my pictures are here, right? Now, this is good, but it's not great in that when I come back and launch this app all over again, I'm asked to authenticate again. Now that's painful. I shouldn't have to do that, right? Well, and the obvious answer to that problem is, let's store those credentials and let's use them next time. So let's see how we can do that. So in Windows, we added a feature called Credential Locker. Now, Credential Locker, what it is a set of APIs that lets you store username and password-like credentials in a secure manner. Let's check out how easy it is to do that. So I am going to add a reference to Credential Locker, create using the Password Vault API. The next thing I want to do is create a password cred object, which is basically a password credential object. And this takes in 3 parameters. One is a resource name, so you can give it whatever string you want, such that it's identifiable. You know what to look for when you store stuff. Of course, username and password. So let's do that real quick. Gonna call the reference my photo app. Pass in the username, so this is the text box that you saw, and the password. All right, so now all I need to do is, using the vault object, add this password cred. Done. That's all I had to do. What I've done here is collected users' credentials and passed them in Credential Locker. Now, obviously, the second part of it is, once I've collected these credentials, when I launch my app, I want to make sure that I look up credentials if they exist. If so, use those credentials and authenticate. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that. Again, just check out the code. This is it. And try and catch make it a little longer than it is. Again, I do the same thing. Create a reference to password vault using the API, vault.findAllByResource. Look up stuff that's stored in Credential Locker. I get back options. Now, if you just look at all the things that you can do with this vault object, it is possible to retrieve all. It is possible for you to find credentials based on the username. Let's say if your app stores a bunch of usernames and you want to do something specific, or resource name specific also. So your app can store various different resource names, and then based on how you want to use it, you can just retrieve these specific objects, right? All right, so with that, let's see what that did. Go back to the same app. This time I'm going to authenticate once more. What's going to happen this time is that when I click on Submit, as you saw, these credentials are going to get stored in Credential Locker. Done. Now, let's imagine after a while I come back and I launch this app again. What happened here is I read those credentials from Credential Locker, used them, authenticated. Now, that's pretty good, right? It gets better. Let me actually switch over to a different machine and launch this app again. See what just happened? I was seamlessly authenticated. How did that happen? Well, that happened because of Credential Locker. The credentials that are stored in Credential Locker roam seamlessly with your Microsoft account to all of your trusted PCs. So let's take a deeper dive into how Credential Locker basically works. So super simple APIs for you to use, secure. You don't have to worry about it. We take care of how these credentials are stored. Other benefits include credential isolation, and I'm going to go into the details of what I mean there. And finally, of course, your credentials just seamlessly roam, right? So let's start. My photo app, in this case, used a basic set of APIs to write stuff to Credential Locker. Now, Credential Locker, as I said, is secure. Using data protection APIs, encrypt the blobs and credentials that we get using the logged on user session key, right? So anything on disk is secure. Of course, this scales to all apps that you might have on the box, on the machine, and is capable of handling all of those apps that the user has installed. Now, I talked about credential isolation, right? What did I mean there? 2 things. Number 1, Credential Locker is specific to the logged on user. It's not a machine-wide store. So if you as a user, stored something in Credential Locker, it belongs to you. Other users cannot peek in, right? That's number 1. Number 2, we also provide isolation between apps. That is, when my photo app stored something in Credential Locker, and app foo stored something in Credential Locker, they only have access to what they stored. Similar to how two apps can't really talk to each other or peep into each other, it's the same way with Credential Locker too. So your secrets are safe, they're isolated, right? Now, I have a bunch of devices. Most of us have at least a desktop, a tablet, a couple of laptops, and so do our users, right? So imagine the scenario where I have an app that stores stuff in Credential Locker, it's on my desktop. I have, obviously, since I love this app so much, I'm sure I have it also installed on my tablet. And the same thing happens there too. Now, how does stuff roam? Using the SkyDrive and Microsoft account, anything that's stored in your Credential Locker just seamlessly roams to all of your trusted PCs, right? Store it once, it's available everywhere instantaneously. If you make any changes on any of these devices, they get replicated everywhere else. What that really enables you to do is first secure those credentials securely, save those credentials securely. Second, they're isolated from apps that might be malicious and might want to read in. And third, they roam, right? So that enables you to provide experiences like, as I showed you, I logged into into my app on device A, and then when I went to my other device, I would just seamlessly logged in. Now, isn't that a great experience? I don't have to do this all over again. And especially on touch devices, entering your passwords, not the most fun thing to do. So really simple for you to do. Use the Credential Locker APIs if your app collects credentials, stores them to connect to services. All right. So now we've talked about how one connects to Microsoft accounts and when connecting to your own services, how you could safely handle credentials. Another really important form of authentication is authenticating to online service providers like Facebook and Twitter, right? And this usually happens over protocols like OAuth. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you know how OAuth works, but for those of you who don't, here's a crash course, right? Entities involved, the online service. Now, this is the service that my application wants to connect to. Something that needs to be done in the background is that your application needs to go ahead and register itself with the online service, right? It needs to declare itself as an application, kind of highlight the stuff it does. So if you use the classic case of Facebook, my application in this case needs to register with Facebook and say, hey, I want access to user's profile or pictures. And then Facebook or the online service provider assigns a client ID to you and a couple of other things that go with it, right? So that's the prereq. What happens next is this application makes a request. Hey, online service provider, I want to be able to connect to you. And in the request, it says, this is who I am. That is the client ID that it got from the online provider. And a bunch of other stuff like, well, and these are the kinds of things I'd like to do, right? The online service then goes, all right, let me look you up. And since this app has already been previously registered, it knows who it is. And the online service then says, all right, I know who you are, I know what you need, but in order to get there, I want the user that's using your application to authenticate, right? So then the user is faced with a login form. They enter their username and credential and password. Once successfully authenticated, the online provider then says, so that's the authentication piece, right? The next stage is the authorization stage. So this is where the online provider goes and says, hey, user, this app's actually trying to gain access to your private information, your personal information, your photos, your contacts, things like that. Are you okay with it? And the user makes that decision. If they're okay with it, then the online service provider goes, all right, things are looking good. I'm going to hand back a token, an OAuth token, back to the application, right? And all of this happens over redirects, HTTP redirects, and finally what you get back is, in most cases, a redirect URL that contains your OAuth token. Then the application goes ahead and parses that string, takes out the OAuth token, and then from there on out, starts talking to the online service directly, right? Great. So when we started designing Windows, we obviously wanted our apps to be social and be able to connect to services over OAuth. There were a couple of problems that we ran into. Number one, there was no browser control. There's a web view, but there's a significant amount of work required for you to convert that and make it a full-blown browser control, right? And even if such a browser control did exist, there was no credential isolation. Why? Because this browser control would have been running in proc with your application, right? So all the pages that are being hosted, the application has access to, which from a security perspective defeats the whole purpose of OAuth. The idea is to abstract away the username and password and just hand out tokens. You can lose these tokens, they can be invalidated after revoked and stuff like that. So what we did was we introduced this feature called the Web Authentication Broker. How many of you know what Web Authentication Broker is? All right, fair majority, but I'm glad to see a few hands not raised. So I'm going to go into the details today of how it works. What we did was we did not really want to reinvent the wheel. OAuth protocols are good. All we did was added a very simple to use WinRT API that wraps all of this magic, right? The app just needs to call the WinRT API. From there on out, we take care of how we render the web pages, how we do the navigation, how we host it in your apps, the user experience around it. Eventually, you get back the application that is the redirect URL, similar to how you used to get it. And then you can extract that token and go about connecting to the online service. So let's switch over again and see how one would do that. So I'm going to go back to my application. And what I want to do now is, pull pictures from my Facebook account, for example. All right, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to declare a method, sync task, and I'm going to call it authenticate to Facebook async. And cool. So let me now go through what we just did. A couple of things here, right? Number one, so the parameters that you pass to the authenticate async, the WebAuth Broker APIs, very similar. Pass in a start, some options, start URI, which basically, again, has things like who do you want to connect to, so the online services URL, your own client ID that was given to you by the online service you're trying to connect to, and other metadata. And finally, you also pass in a stop URL, right? This is how after all the redirects are done, this is where I want you to stop and come back, right? So that's exactly what I'm doing here. I have a start URI and an end URI, pretty straightforward. And this is the Web Authentication Broker call. So like I said, simple, one call, 3 parameters. All right. Now I'm going to invoke this. So let's drop a button maybe. All right. Let's say connect to Facebook. I'm going to give it a name. Big button. Oh, I need to spell better. All right. And now, just make a simple call to my connect to Facebook. I'm also going to hide the button once I'm done. All right, done. So I have a connect to Facebook button. Let's see what that does, right? And I click on this. This is the Web Authentication Broker now. What's happening here is the same flow. The call went to Facebook. Facebook said, yes, I know who you are. I need your user to authenticate. So this is the login page. So I'm going to go ahead and authenticate. All right. That's not cool. Let's try this again. Well, I'm going to just use my own account. All right. So, well, since I've already used this app, you would have normally seen a authorization page as well. I love this app, so clearly I've used it a couple of times. One of the new things that we've added in Windows 8.1 is the ability for the user to consent to saving their credentials in this flow, right? So if I've done this once, I say, yeah, save my credentials. I'm going to click yes. Now what's going to happen is, obviously I connected to Facebook, got a token back. My app took out the token from the redirect URL, made a bunch of calls and pulled pictures. And these are my pictures from Facebook. All right, and one of the other things I wanted to actually highlight is, so a lot of folks mentioned that it's simple to call the WebAuth Broker API, but slightly more complex to get a token out and just do basic things like connecting to these online services. So we have gone ahead and also updated our samples. So now our samples do connect to Facebook and Twitter. So I've just basically copy-pasted this from the sample itself. So definitely check it out. And also, I don't know how many folks got a chance to check out Peter's talk on the HTTP client APIs and the auth and the filters. So if you haven't, I recommend checking that talk out. It's 4092. And basically, you could do all of this and write a filter that you just use in your APIs, in your app, that actually makes your app's logic much cleaner, and you could just wrap all the authentication logic in there. And you can use Web Authentication Broker there. Also, what we've done is we've updated our samples to use the HTTP client filters. So definitely recommend checking those out. All right, so let's switch back now and take a deeper dive into what just happened. So, as you saw, super simple API to use. One call it, get back a redirect URL, you're good to go. Also, there are other benefits that this API provides. Credential isolation, right? And I'm going to get into slightly more details as to what I mean there too. Also, we support single sign-on. So let's take this is kind of a high-level architecture view of what really happens, right? So the calling application, this is the application for my photo app, makes a call to the broker process. So this automatically happens when you call the WinRT API. Now this broker process goes and spawns off a new process, which is running at the medium integrity level, which is the WebAuth Broker component. Now this component does two things. It spawns off a new process, which is called the auth host. Auth host is running in a separate app container. Auth host is where we do all of our web content rendering. And so we wanted to make sure that all the web content that was coming in wasn't running at a medium integrity level. We wanted to keep it safe such that it was secure. The other thing it does is it also creates a dialog, the modal dialog that you saw, and parents the auth host in that dialog. So you get all the benefits of just the dialog, scales, works fine, snaps, and all those things are just automatically taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. The auth host is where like I said, the navigational redirects happen. The login page is rendered, and you click on login, all that good stuff, right? Eventually, once you get to your success page and you are ready to go back, auth host goes back to this dialog, everything's basically torn down. All that is left is this redirect URL that we give back to the calling application. And then this calling application goes ahead, extracts that token, goes for it. What I also said was WebAuth Broker supports single sign-on. What does single sign-on in this case really mean? Slightly different than the previous case that I talked about, where it was my app, I collected credentials, and I'm logged in, right? And subsequently, I'm still logged in. Now that can happen. As long as you hang on to that token that you got back, you can just continue to be logged in and provide all the services. Single sign-on in this case is slightly more nuanced. What we mean here is single sign-on across applications. If a user has logged in to a particular online service once via any app, if subsequently your app connects to the same service, you can just seamlessly bypass the authentication page. How that works is basically, well, your logon cookies are created and they're persisted. By default, the WebAuth Broker does not do single sign-on. This is to make sure that folks just don't leverage the idea of so that the user is already logged in and I can just, kind of sneak in. You have to opt in. And let's kind of take a closer look of how the single sign-on mode with the Web Authentication Broker works. Again, the same sort of setup. I have my app, my Photos app on the left, which is running in an app container, user mode. I have the Web Auth Broker component. I've just made it one box. It wants to connect to my online service, which in this case is contoso.com. My app makes a call to Web Authentication Broker. I do want to call out your attention to the request. Right? For the most part, doesn't matter. What you might want to look at is the Contoso app ID, which is my photo app. Now, this is fictitious, of course. I got this from contoso.com when I registered my app. The cool thing, or the important thing I want you to note, is the redirect URL, which is in blue. The ms-app://sid. This is how you specify single sign-on mode. There are ways. So when you saw the Authenticate Async API, it took parameters, right? Options, start, end. You could skip the end, because this is what the end needs to be. And let's kind of drill into why. So once my app makes a call and the Web Authentication Broker kicks in, goes to contoso.com, contoso.com verifies whether if my photo app exists or not, all that good stuff happens. It also does one extra thing. It checks for all the registered redirect URLs that your app specified when it registered with Contoso. Now, this is done to make sure that the final token that Contoso is going to give you back goes to the intended target. Right? So Contoso.com finally says, yeah, you're good, you've authenticated, you've authorized, here's the token. Now, this, in the single sign-on mode, Web Authentication Broker does something special. What the Web Authentication Broker does is, once it comes across the MS app-like redirect, it knows, all right, my job here is done. I'm ready to go back to the application. But before it does that, what it does is it matches the MS app://sid that you got back from contoso.com to the application's security descriptor. It does so automatically. And only if these two entities match do we go back to the calling application with the token. Right? Now, why are we doing this? We're primarily doing this to make sure that the app that is really intended to get the token gets it. So imagine a scenario here. Now, we talk about a bad app. Let's say this has already happened, right? My photo app has already previously connected using the single sign-on mode, and everything's good. It's connected, right? A bad app, you could just replace the good app by a bad app, and it can basically make the same call, right? It could just pass in my photo app as the ID and that redirect, right? It's going to go all the way up. Now, because my logon cookies are there, so one thing that I'd like to call out also, in the regular mode of Web Authentication Broker, the auth host component that you saw, we tear it down, right? Auth host is basically where all the cookies are kept. So as you can imagine, if I've logged on and I said keep me signed in and persisted logon cookies were created, eventually when the Web Auth Broker returns, auth host is purged, and with it all the cookies. So when you come back, any other application that subsequently makes a call to Web Authentication Broker, well, it's like it never happened, so your users have to authenticate again. In the SSO mode, we have a special auth host, the SSO auth host, right, in which we, well, hang on to it, such that when you come back, it's there. We leverage the same old, right? Cookies sent up, seamlessly authenticated. So going back to the bad app example now, because this has already happened, the bad app makes a call to Web Authentication Broker, auth host has the logon persisted cookies and sends them up to contoso.com. Everything just works. I'm not prompted to authenticate because I've done that before. I'm not prompted to authorize the app because, well, my photo app has been authorized. And so the redirect URL contains the token, gets back to the Web Auth Broker. Because the bad app now cannot spoof its security descriptor, When WebAuth Broker finally encounters the MS app, it matches the SID that it got back from the redirect URL and that of the calling application, which is in this case is the bad app. And in the bad app's case, these two won't match. So, well, we won't go back, right? So bad app can't just piggyback on a good app and impersonate and get back an authentication token. Cool. Now, I want to call out a couple of things. If you're an app developer, please use single sign-on. I'll take questions at the end if you don't mind. If you own online services that apps can connect to over protocols like OAuth, please make it possible for app developers to register their apps. And, well, of course, that happens, but also register redirect URLs of the format msapp://sid, compliant with OAuth 2.0, so please do that. A couple of things that I also want to highlight. So this is kind of a rough mock-up of the dialog that you saw. It is possible for you, as again, the online service provider, to customize this dialog. You could, of course, all the things in blue are stuff that you own. The center page, which is where all the web pages are rendered, you could optimize it to work well with this dialog. Also, you could change the title text, you could change the color, you could pass in an icon. What that lets you do is really showcase your brand's personality on Windows. We want you to be able to do that. And so please go ahead and leverage these meta tags. The way you do it is, we of course have a special user agent string. So based on that user agent string, you could leverage some meta tags that let you specify these things. Super straightforward to use. Again, all the guidance is up online, so please check it out. So again, to summarize, connecting to web services like Facebook and Twitter is super simple, really important. Let's do it. In order to do that, check out the Web Authentication Broker APIs. They make it super simple for you to do it and provide all the goodness. If you own an online service, please make it possible for folks to register redirect URLs of the format msapp://sid, and also optimize your pages such that they look great when your users are connecting to your services. Now that's great. So we've talked about authentication, right? We've talked about how one connects to MSA, leverage that, how it connects to your own service, and what is the best way of doing that, how one should connect to third parties. And in the process, when you get those user credentials, how one should store them and stuff. Now I talked about, these are interesting concepts to us. The users don't really need to know them, right? It should be seamless. So let's talk about how one should expose these settings to the end user, right? Today, when we look at the apps that are out there, we have various formats when it comes to presenting options to log on. We have the NASCAR model where the app comes up and the canvas is full of login, login, login. I mean, I'm guilty too. My app has a connect to Facebook button. Then we have apps that use the app bar. Then we have apps that use the charm, the settings charm. There are a lot of different models, right? And while that's good, it's, again, not that great. The problem is our users have to end up discovering how to use your app every time they install a new app, right? They need to find how do I log in? How do I log out? Where am I going to find these options that are related to my accounts? That's not good because it really results in user frustration because you're hoping to find something somewhere and you don't find it, and that's not cool. And not to mention, like, just coming up with new ways is just extra work for us. Why do it, right? Why do I need to spend cycles on figuring out how this should be done? It should be easy. It should be straightforward. So let's talk about how it's possible to do that. So I'm going to switch back over to my dev box. All right. So going back to the same application. In Windows 8, we added the settings framework, the charms framework, right? Swipe from the right, you see the charms. It's a launching point into a lot of very context-aware settings, right? You can always get to it when you need to, but otherwise it goes away and your users go back to using your application. Get a full screen view. We really like that model. It's a good model because, like I said, it's easily discoverable, accessible, and gets out of your way when you don't need it. So what we wanted to do was build upon that And so in Windows 8.1, we want the users to rely on finding account-related settings, under accounts. That is, and that should be the de facto way. And we need your help in order to get there. So let's see what we've done that makes it easy to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is, so if you already use the settings contract in your apps, you kind of are familiar with this flow. So we've kind of made sure that we've tailored these new APIs on the existing settings pane APIs. So there's there's actually no learning curve. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and declare a settings command delegate, and then define what this settings should do. All right, so all this is going to do is, I'm going to just show you what it does. Launch this app, same app. When I go to settings, I start seeing accounts. Simple. It's inbuilt, just doing that happens. Now, what I want to also be able to specify is what happens once the user clicks on accounts, right? So again, very similar. Going to go ahead, declare my accounts command delegate, and specify what it should do. All right, so what I have right here is super simple. You get to provide a header text that will start showing up when I click on accounts. So to make this a little bit more interesting, let's, so you remember the credential locker object that I created, that I stored? Now that's an account that I used to log into the application, right? So it'd be great to actually let the user know that, hey, that's the logged in user. So let's check out how one would do that. That's it. And this is just to make sure that so this was the same credential password that I had. I'm just making sure that it exists. And then I go ahead and use the credential command, create an instance, and pass it the password cred. So this is actually the blob that had all the information. And also specify an action. So let's see by doing that what that did. Going back to this application, when I swipe from the right, settings, I see accounts. This is what I see. The header text that provides context to your user. You can customize it. And a credential locker object that you just passed. That was all you had to do. You already had it. Just pass it in. It's exposed. Has basic, so the resource string that I used to create the object is up there, and then the username that I used to log in is also there. Additionally, I can click on this and see more information about the account name, the user. And if you noticed, I had an action specified, which was remove, right? So basically what remove does is when I click on remove, it's going to go ahead and delete that credential. Simple. What you can also do is if I go back to this application and go to the definition. So this is where I'm doing it. You can do add extra code to that. So basically, it's just a callback. When the user clicks on delete, it's of course going to go ahead and delete that credential locker object from where it's stored, but you can do additional tasks as part of your logout flow. What I could do is when the user clicks log out or remove, I sign them out. Get rid of those photos that one sees, right? Super simple to use. All right. What else can I do? Oftentimes, we want to provide account-related sort of links that operations, right? For example, sign up for a premium account. Click here to get privacy policies. Click here to change your sync settings, etc. It's super simple to go ahead and do that too. What you can do is add links. In my case, I've just added a privacy policy. Super simple. Create a settings command and pass it basically the command ID so that you can uniquely identify when such an event is clicked. When it gets a callback into your application, you know what just happened. And then you can also specify the handler. So when privacy policy is clicked, that handler is invoked. In that handler, you can specify if encountered ID 1, do XYZ. And just by doing that, what I get is when I go to settings, I have privacy policy. Now, as I said, clicking on privacy policy is a callback into your application. So you can do various things here. You could either just call, click here and open a web link, or you could also, using the new XAML controls, you could use the flyout and create subsequent flyouts, right? The power is yours, whatever you want. We purposely did not try to put in too much here because we knew it has to scale to everything that you want to be able to do. However, this is a great launching point. From here, you could take your users to wherever you want. Finally, I hate that connect to Facebook button right now. So let's see how I can just provide the same functionality, which is leveraging the framework, right? Slide from the right, see settings, go to accounts, and from there expose the idea or the notion that, hey, you can connect to Facebook, right? So what I've done here is I've created a web account provider right here. What this class takes is an ID, again, to know what's going on. Second, a display name, so you could customize it to whichever account you're providing. So in my case, it'll be Facebook. And finally, an icon. For Credential Locker, you don't need to do that. We've already taken care of that. But when it comes to other identity providers, you could customize it to the identity provider you're connecting to. The same thing, the same format, right? I register a handler, then the handler needs to be, specified and defined, and what all needs to happen. So what's going to happen now is, why talk about it? Let's just see it. Oh, actually, let me get rid of that button that I'm not a big fan of. Let's get rid of this guy. Let's get rid of that. And so this is the callback, right? So when a web account provider is clicked, the web account provider in this case would be Facebook. When that is clicked, I get to specify what should happen. So what I'm really doing is calling the authenticate to Facebook async method that I created, right? So now let's give this a go. Swipe from the right, accounts. I have my, notice that there's an add an account link. Now that shows up when you have web providers specified. In our case, we've specified one, so when I click on add an account, the style just shows up. Of course, you get to specify, like I said, the name, the icon. Now when I tap on this is a callback into my application. What that means is you get to specify what you want to happen subsequently. So this framework is very flexible. You can make web authentication broker calls. You could make any API calls for that matter. You could use the online ID APIs, connect to Azure Active Directory, whatever you want. In this case, we're connecting to Facebook, so let's do that. Another interesting point, right? Since when I did this last, I decided to save my credentials. They're pre-populated. They're just here. And they're stored in Credential Locker once again. So you get all those benefits. So if I'm on a different machine, well, because I've done this once, I don't have to do it on any of my other machines. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And obviously my pictures are here. When I go back to my accounts, now what I did was created an instance of the web account provider, and it has various states, right? It has the disconnected state, it has the connected state. So this is currently in the connected state. So if you set the object to connected, it just starts showing up here, right? And you can pass in the username, and it just inherits the resource name. And similar to how we saw stuff here, we're going to see similar information here too, right? The resource name, username, and then you get to provide these actions, which basically commands that, again, are callbacks into your application. So when I click on manage, you could do something. When I click on remove, you could do something else. So that's how simple it is. What that small little thing did was, as a user now, we can ensure that users find accounts where they're looking for them. You don't have to discover this app every time. And the thing is, like, when you really think about how many apps users install on various different devices, this problem is compounded, and it's really painful. So if you just look at for example, the map app. We've done the same. This uses accounts control, and there. We can go to IE. All the credentials that IE stores are under accounts. They're right here. Use the inbox apps, you'll find them there. So we want to be able to provide the same experience to all of our users, and we need your help to do that. The good thing there is, like I said, they find what they're looking for, where they're looking for it, and essentially what that results in is a more seamless experience. They can get to using your application rather than playing with how to log in, log out, and all that good stuff. All right. Again, reiterating, easy to use, predictable, and saves you time. You don't have to worry about XAML and debugging it and how I should provide these options to the end user. It's just there's that standard way. Just go ahead and use it and you'll be good. And so to summarize now, the key takeaways that I want you guys to leave with, number one, let's provide a great experience when it comes to authentication in your apps. When it comes to connecting using the power of Microsoft account or connecting to Windows services, check out the Live SDK. Great set of tools for you to leverage, make things really easy. If you collect user credentials, use the credential locker APIs to store them securely and to provide seamless roaming. If you're connecting to online service providers like Facebook and Twitter and Picasa and Yahoo and all of these guys, use the Web Authentication Broker APIs. Super simple to use. Your users get the benefit. If you are an online service provider, make it possible for folks to register the SSO callback, which is the MS app ://SID, and also optimize your pages so that they look good, right? Showcase your brand's personality on Windows. And finally, abstract away all of these details from the end user and provide them in a very clean, predictable, intuitive way using the accounts control. These are some resources, so I highly recommend checking them out once you get a chance, and folks online as well. Click on them. They have great details on how you can just go ahead. Also, I want to highlight the fact that we've revamped our SDK samples. So Credential Locker, just check that sample out. Easily copy-pastable, super simple to use. Web Authentication Broker sample has been updated as well. Has a couple of new scenarios, so does connect to Facebook and does connect to Twitter. And also has the HTTP client filters in there, so recommend checking them out. Also, what we've done is we haven't created a new SDK sample for the accounts UX work that I just talked about. Makes no sense. What we've done is we've just integrated the samples into our Credential Locker SDK sample. So there's, I think, a Manage UI option, so you can just see how it's done there. And the same with the Web Authentication Broker sample too, of how you could just use seamlessly these account settings, APIs, and do that. That's all I had. Thank you so much for coming and attending this talk. I hope you guys found out something cool that you can leverage in your apps. Thank you, and have a safe journey back home.